Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome. It's social distancing.
It is, but we're doing it in a different format, so we'll see how we go. I feel like I shouldn't have probably wore like the most... So I'll just try to stay extremely still.
Fortunately, all my outfit is silent cotton, so it's going to be fine.
You did a good job today. So I've been like super busy all day, and I heard from the other room, from the other end of the house, you cackling like a madman. I feel like I may have missed something. So do you want to let me know what happened today?
I do. I am going to talk about what we are going to discuss, but I took notes.
Shit, this
I actually prepared. I took notes on the electronic pad about the lockdown protest in Melbourne today. So we're going to talk about that.
Oh shit. All I saw was a photo of some guy being led away by the cops. Did it get that serious?
Several guys were led away by the cops.
Okay.
So let's all talk about it. So several hundred people gathered on the steps of Parliament House in Melbourne today.
It's a real place to do it.
Yes, it is.
Trendy.
Well, it's nice and centralised, and I think some
it also looks
groups,
like the authoritarian regime behind you because you've got all those statues of like birds. And,
it's the City Hall vibe going on. It's better than a train station in Trafalgar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Ouch.
So we're going to talk about, what their intention was, how it kind of played out, what the response from the man was, and how it was reported in the media, and how all these things don't necessarily line up. So the deal was several hundred people cluster around, and the stated intent is that it is a protest against government corruption.
Okay. And they did it on Mother's Day, like no connection to Mother's Day.
No connection. Well, I believe Victoria's held on to the strictness of its social distancing laws a little bit longer than the other states, which I think is part of the pushback.
Because we still have the virus.
Yeah, we had like an extra 20 cases in the last few days. So they're still being kind of strict on that. And also, which means, at least in Victoria, they were saying you can't go visit your mother on Mother's Day.
Yeah, I heard that the Premier literally said you cannot hug and kiss your mum. Is that true?
Yeah, he said, I'm not going to go visit my mum on Mother's Day.
Good. She's probably like 1,000 years old.
Yes. My mother? How dare you? She's
No.
72.
His mother.
Oh, okay. Daniel Andrews' mother. Am I older than Daniel Andrews?
I don't think so.
No, okay, we'll find out. Probably not. Okay, so look, the group, it was sort of several groups kind of mashed together, as these things always are. And,
hangers on.
And they've stated it's not a lockdown protest or an anti-vaxxer protest or a 5G protest, but that it's a protest against government corruption. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, why do they feel the need to be like, it's not these things? Like, were some people suggesting that it was these things?
Well, I think like any sort of protest group, what they're trying to avoid is the reductive language that tends to surround these sort of things. It's like in the
99%.
Yeah, it's like the climate change, the climate protests of late last year. They were anxious not to be branded as lunatic hippies or anything like that. They're just like, which concerned citizens who want a healthy planet for our children? And so in the same way... They're
getting their brand on point.
Yeah. And
so their brand is anti-lockdown.
Anti-government corruption.
Oh.
Okay.
I mean, that's so vague. I mean, who's pro-government corruption?
Yes, I know. Like the people they're speaking, it was a lot of, we're not here to incite violence. We're here to ask questions, and them being there out of love for their fellow citizens and wanting to inform people.
Just a second. Like, when you say they're there out of love and not violence, like I don't think it's violence, but when it's not love for their fellow citizens, because what about all the people who are immunocompromised who really need everybody to like social distance?
Excellent
because those people
question.
were not social distancing. Like the photos I saw, there was like, how many people were there? A couple hundred, squished.
I'd say at least 400 or 500.
Which is, it's hard to get people out on a Sunday.
It's the biggest one so far. And it's the first protest I can think of.
What was the demographic though? Was it a bunch of white people?
You know what? I thought it was going to be that too. I thought it was going to be nothing but middle-aged white guys talking. And there were a few of those, but...
there were also middle-aged women there, so...
No, and also not all white either. Like and again, the message was they were very conscious to be all, this is not about race, this is not about colour. The speakers were,
the sentiment does feel like it's semi-anti-Chinese though.
Yes, but honestly, I didn't catch all the speeches, so I'm trying to recap this, having watched maybe about 2 hours worth of a decent event lengthwise. And so they were like, it's not about race, it's not about this. All the speakers weren't just old white dudes, although the majority were, but not all of them. And all the participants weren't either, in terms of the attendees. And it was really just about government accountability and concern for the rights being taken away. However, the content of the speeches, I don't know if this was the intent or not, but it did diverge somewhat from that. There's always
some person who's like, I just want to do a poem. You're like,
yes, exactly. Look, it was very non-violent, unless you consider country music to be a form of violence, and I do, because there were songs. Look, what we also had was, despite their claim that it's not an anti-vaxxer protest, not an anti-5G protest, as I tuned into the live stream, there was
people melting from 5G. It was crazy.
That would have been quite validating, but there was a guy reading a list of vaccine side effects. And, I mean, sure, but also, have you looked through the side effects of a pack of Panadol? Have you, when you get prescription medication, they have to list them all because it's the law. And in Australia, we still have certain laws about product.
Okay, here's my question to you. Is there an issue with your movement even if we give this the benefit of the doubt and suggest that this isn't sort of like a fringe movement on its own, if it's just anti-corruption, who can't get behind anti-corruption? Is there an issue with your movement if the rhetoric that you espouse attracts people who definitely are fringe?
Arguably, yes. And we don't just mean fringe, we mean problematic.
Like tiny bangs. Like, I mean fringe of society, like...
Crazy bit.
Well...
We don't like to use the C word.
No.
But, that's the thing.
Now we're being reductive.
Yeah, we are. And that's, that was really what they were trying to...
Let's let them stand by the content of their speeches. So what else did they say?
One guy was talking about, the whole point of this, and no one actually said there's no such thing as coronavirus, or I didn't catch that, which then begets the question of why no one was wearing masks and no one was social distancing, because the fact is they could have held this protest like they did at the one in Trafalgar and stayed 1.5 metres apart, but they were not. They were very bunched in, and that was the usual thing where there's like a line of police officers at the back to make sure no people go onto the tram tracks.
So the police were just like standing there while they gave their speeches?
In the background, not behind the speakers, not between Parliament House and the speakers, on the other side where the road is, which they've got to do because they can't have someone hit by a car on that. So there was some speakers saying, look, they're saying it's a health and safety thing for COVID-19, but what about all the people who are committing suicide in isolation? What about gambling going up? And I would have thought whatever...
Gambling's going up?
Well, he didn't quote any stats.
Everyone at home doing microtransactions?
Yeah, if everyone's on there, like there's no sports bet unless they're just betting on whether the lockdown's going to end. But I would have thought that the lack of access to pokies in the casino would diminish gambling as an issue.
Also, I feel like it's such a, I don't want to assume they were men's rights activists, but there does seem to be an awful lot of emphasis on suicide all the time.
Yeah, well, any movement that's sort of...
Anyway.
Yes, we're all killing ourselves.
Is there evidence? I don't know, but is there evidence of suicides going up?
They didn't cite it, and I didn't look it up.
Right.
Okay, so I'm just sort of going, this is, the intention here is to be as good faith as possible. Because I think it's a cheap shot to be reductive. Yeah, I'll try. A lot of comparisons to the Nazis in terms of the government being fascistic, particularly Daniel Andrews. Even though ultimately the buck kind of stops with the federal government, Daniel Andrews copped a lot of it. He got called a socialist, a communist, and a fascist, which is it's a lot of hats for a man with one head to wear. Tyrannical, tyrant, that was thrown around a lot. Power mad.
And what is the actions that he's taken that they're levelling this accusation, like just being locked in because there's a deadly virus?
Well, I think of all the states, he has been the most cautious in terms of prioritising safety of lives.
What a fucking monster.
Yeah, what a jerk. What an arsehole. Yeah, I kind of like Daniel Andrews. Like, he's still a politician.
Oh my God, this is the most I've ever heard from him. And the reasoned, measured approach. Like, again, I don't think, nobody's perfect. But, fuck, in this one circumstance, I think he's probably one of the few people who's shown some real fucking leadership.
So, look, other stuff that came out, the idea was that this is being used as a smokescreen, this coronavirus and the lockdown, for him to approve other laws. The Belt and Rail Initiative got mentioned, which, Google it on your own time, but it's kind of like, it's a Chinese government initiative where they're investing in the infrastructure of other countries.
But, they didn't invent modern colonialism. People are allowed to
America
do infrastructure.
has done this for years. Yeah. So it
just,
is basically China adopting some of those models.
I know, but I just feel like it's always coupled with thinly veiled racism.
Yeah, it was okay if Americans... Well, I know Australia is often pretty culturally sus of the Americans too, so when they're investing, building military bases on Australian land.
Why don't we go back to isolationism? That worked out really well.
All right, things kind of got off the rails. There was, for all their talk about it not being a 5G protest, talk about 5G protest, 5G towers
With
going
the
up there.
other people on the podium just please don't mention 5G.
I didn't see any of the speakers cringing, but you could feel the group get polarized as some people talked about it being a plot from Satan. Some people talked about scripture quite a bit.
Wow.
All right, so one guy pointed at the sky and said, you see all these clouds going on? That's chemtrails. And so it got kind of fringe out there. One guy got up and as he spoke, I had flashbacks of when people would call up when I worked for civic compliance and try to get out of their fines by claiming they're a sovereign citizen. So that's kind of
cool.
That's sort of your laws don't apply to me.
Are they living out in the Western Australia?
I don't think it's like that guy who started the Principality.
Yeah,
but it like that. He of all of the speakers sounded the most extreme.
He definitely has a website on GeoCities that he still maintains, and it's all Comic Sans.
I only catch the train because planes are a conspiracy. yeah, and so.
But he doesn't want that rail project to go ahead.
So the sovereign citizen movement, it's more in America than here, but it's kind of the idea of I do not acquiesce to this idea of broader government control. They want sort of community level control
as they drive around on the roads and benefit from the fact that there is a society.
Yes, and so it's kind of an anti-tax. They don't mind the idea of a local sheriff because they're locally voted.
Then?
But the idea, very, very localized is that. So he kind of ranted around on that, and he definitely lost the crowd. They were like, I felt a bit of pullback. This is kind of not what we're after.
Okay.
He also said that Australians, like white people, have been in this country for a lot longer than they say, and talked about
what does he mean?
Churches being built in Australia in the 1500s. And stuff like that.
What is that?
He went out there, so I don't know how vetted he was by the
organisers. Did he have an actual tinfoil hat, or was he just kind of like a man?
No, but he spoke with the frantic urgency of a man who
You have to believe me.
the kind of urgency that you'd speak with when you think any second now you're going to be dragged away. So you've got to get all your ideas out at once.
Oh, okay.
So he was quite manic. But look, in general, the vibe was very peaceful, okay?
That's nice.
And even then, a couple of people in the background sounded like they were trying to arc up and be troublemakers, and you could hear the group shut them down. Mm-hmm. And they'd be like, not those guys, they're not part of this, they're troublemakers. So, look, I really can't fault honestly, the vibe was very similar to when we went to the climate change protest. It's just, look, we're not happy, we want to ask questions. The main difference is that it was happening at a time where the man has said, there's germs everywhere, you can't gather.
Just the man, is it? It's not just the man. It's the scientific consensus is that social distancing is the way and method to control a pandemic.
Yes.
It's not the man for some weird, it's not just doing this for weird capitalistic, evil, super duper mega crazy reasons. There are good reasons to be doing this, and it's hurting a lot of people, but it's also saving, it's a net good. So yes. I don't know, I really don't think it is the same, and it isn't normal.
But then one of the reasons why they're protesting is because there are laws against these sort of protests at the moment. But that's okay, because if you think they shouldn't have been protesting, so did the man. And the police finally stepped into action. And I'm not saying that this would have been handled differently if it was a different group of people protesting, like just students or something, but they had a pretty light touch. So rather than, we've seen protests in the Western world still break down where the line of riot shields
But is that in Australia?
Forward.
Realistically,
No.
the only protest I've ever been to was the G21 in Melbourne.
And how rough did that get?
That got really rough, really, really rough. And I've been to...
Were there young people arcing up there as well?
But that's exactly right.
Yes.
That was a super... And then the only other one that even had any semblance of that kind of this, it's almost like it's like you people are acting like you're being oppressed, like those actual places where it's being oppressed, but really the police are like, don't make me.
It is not the same as Tiananmen Square.
It's not the
That's
same.
not the situation.
It's not.
No.
That's not what's happening.
I mean, I guess they think their concerns are it could get to that
Sure.
situation if they don't fight now. But look, it's to their credit, it was not a violent protest, and accordingly, it wasn't broken up violently. And how it kind of broke down was sort of like a series of surgical strikes. Basically, what the police were doing were in controlled clusters. They'd reach out, grab one guy who was one of the ringleaders, pull him away from the group, hold him in position. And then slowly the paddy wagons show up.
Are they
on the
moving as
street.
like a hive mind?
Yes.
Okay.
It looked like it's at a cellular level. If
I was thinking it was like that Katamari game where you roll around and collecting stuff. Like,
a bit.
Okay.
So
can
rather
get
than
behind that.
so it was definitely the police did it with a scalpel rather than a hammer. Which strategically I got to respect because they avoided
but also,
a giant brawl.
double strategically, don't they need to do that so that they don't just reaffirm these people's belief that they're somehow like this crazy authoritarian regime who's going to
Absolutely.
punish them and come down like a hammer?
Like if they're out there saying the man won't let us do this, and
Then the
then
man's
the
like,
man
"Eh."
comes down and
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. And so obviously they had, especially yesterday when there was a much smaller protest in
pre-protest
Sydney.
that people
No, it was
have
in
pre-drinks?
Sydney,
Oh, right.
and a woman was protesting with her kid. They arrested the mother,
the mum.
but she wouldn't get in, and they couldn't force her into the wagon while she was holding a child. So they had to take the kid out of her hands.
It's like
It
Tetris.
was a really bad
Awkward.
look. It was like.
Do you know that the police all went home and had like a massive meeting to be like, okay, guys, so
Yes.
let's just be like super careful with everybody today
You know,
because like,
we had a good game. Problem was, it looked awful when we wrenched the child from the mother's hands.
okay, so no wrenching. We just want to avoid wrenching
No.
at all costs because we do not want to be in the media.
And I
being
would say
portrayed as that.
event in Sydney certainly incentivized the protesters today, but I believe it also had a big factor in the way the police handled it.
Yeah.
So they were just scoop and grab it. One of my friends was there, a colleague from wrestling who was also involved in these protests, and they took him down and stuff like that,
They
tackled
took
him from
him down?
behind. Yeah, I pity the police who had to try and hold that man in place because he is very
Yeah,
strong and very
right.
stubborn. And so
Did he just like Hulk out? He's like, "Rah!"
couldn't
like
see,
the whole.
went down under all the police. So basically, it was like 10, 12, pile on, grab, take to the back, away from the group, and then
Wait,
when
is he in
the police
jail?
wagons turn up, no, everyone's been released now. No one's been held, to my knowledge.
So they just take
One-
him down to the police station and are like, don't.
Yeah, basically, the police have said that they have fined people who were there, the big $1,600 we told you not to be there fines. And I think people who were released were told you can't go back to that space for 24 hours. It just kind of petered out.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens usually. People are like, I don't want to be the last one standing around.
Yeah.
Okay.
They weren't, it didn't sort of escalate into screams of what's happening. It certainly didn't look anything like the G20 protests you were talking about back
In the, I want to say 2000s?
about 10 years ago. Yeah. So police were peaceful, protesters were peaceful. Then the media starts carrying it. The first story that I read, news.com.au, was like dozens. There were more than dozens.
Okay, but here's the thing. I studied journalism, and can I tell you why they would have done that? 2 reasons. One, they never want to say a specific number in case they're wrong.
True.
But they also, I bet because news.com, I mean, I would caution that they're probably hedging their bets and don't want to make this seem like a bigger deal than it is. They don't want to give it fuel for the fire. And their editors would probably be mindful of that. That's like their ethical responsibility, which isn't, that's like that thing again where it's like, it's not truth, but there's also a consideration about, do you want to give this thing airtime?
Yes, so they are reporting with agenda, obviously. We've done our post-truth episode. But it was very much, wasn't that big a deal, was the language of that one. But they did try to say that there weren't that many people there. And, it wasn't like many people compared to the climate protests of last year, and it certainly wasn't many people compared to the we don't want to go to war with Iraq protests. But it was more than dozens.
I was expecting.
I would have said 1,000, maybe 1,000. I don't know. At least about 500.
So were they covering those steps? Or like spilling out into the area?
Spilling out on the side. It was a decent bunch of people.
Yeah.
So they took that down. And then other articles I saw kind of, use the word clash. protesters clashed with police. And to me, that is the protesters go forward, hit a wall of cops, and they go, douche. You say clash, I think Persians and Spartans, 300. This is a clash.
The Red Sea, screaming back.
Yeah. This is clash.
Yeah.
It was not that. At all. I wouldn't have even said that the individuals who were arrested it was a clash.
Was that news.com
as well? Snagged. No, that might have been on the Age. I looked at the ABC one as well, 10 Daily.
Again, arguably, it just sounds more exciting.
Yes, and the other thing that came through definitely in the language of the articles, I didn't hear a lot about how peaceful the protests were, but a lot of them did take the time to mention the anti-vaxxer chemtrail 5G rhetoric. So even though the event organisers, or at least certain figureheads, kind of went out to say, we are not this, it's just about informing, the message, especially with some of the speakers, it definitely came across that way. I don't want our government to get, our world, our nation, to get into a space where people don't ask these sort of questions. Right. But the problem is when the fringe extremists or some of the wackier ideas, and frankly, I consider coronavirus being started by 5G a wacky idea. I personally consider chemtrails to be a wacky idea. If you think we're wrong and you have evidence accordingly, link it in the comments below.
You don't, so there won't be any comments.
But I think it's important to question authority, and I think it's important to say, hey, while this is going on, they're approving offshore drilling or whatever, or they're still approving logging while people are distracted by this. And I don't think it's like going to war.
But don't
War's a great distraction.
People have just taken I'm skeptical. That is no longer a mode of trying to understand knowledge. It is that is the worldview. Not trusting and not believing anything is in their perspective, it seems is the only way to not be a sheeple, and therefore you're that's the only way to truly be. Yeah, the way I view the world is I say no to everything unless I already agree with it. It does. It feels like I don't know what the word would be, but the layman's thing of instead of scientific rationale, you've just taken basic skepticism, applied it as a blanket worldview, and then applied it to everything. The other thing is these people a lot of talk comes out of, think critically, analyze, do your research. And then they share a weird video from YouTube where you're that's not. What they didn't do. That's not in order, say here, right now, hear us, I've kind of said, there's these people, and some of what they said, they were crazy, but some of their intentions are honourable, and they were deliberately non-violent, but also this, and also that is, I'm not doing the Trumpy good people on both sides, by which I mean I quietly endorse Nazis. But I am acknowledging the potential value and at least trying to operate in good faith, and most of all, acknowledging that I may be wrong. And what I didn't get out of that at all at any point in that protest was, we could be wrong and coronavirus could be a real thing, but we still have concerns about the way these laws are being applied and the truth is being dispensed. There's none of that. It's just, they are lies. We are 100% right. We do not acknowledge the fact that we could possibly be wrong about any of this. And I think it's too narrow, and it undermines their argument that they are thinking critically when they can't even acknowledge the fact that they could be wrong. Yes. Whereas I can always, nay, frequently be wrong. And that opens me up to find out things that I don't know. But the problem ultimately is that we are run by a goddamn Nazi fascist government who's no. You know what?
Telling us what to do. Telling us what to do.
This is not your soapbox. This is not your soapbox. We're not going to have this. We're not going to have this situation here on this fucking channel. I'm sorry, everybody, but we're not going to have one of these. It's not acceptable. Come here. Getting out of here.
This is Democracy Manifest.
Let's
get your hands off my penis. Get your hands off my penis.